Turn in your Bibles to the book of Genesis, chapter 45. In 1893, gold was discovered in West Australia in a place called Cary. Very, very hot and no water there, hardly any water. They have a picture here. There was an engineer, C.Y. O'Connor. He convinced the government, he said, we could build a pipeline from Perth to Cary, 350 miles uphill is what it would take. But he said, I'm telling you, it will work. And they began to do that. The next photo, they began working on this pipeline in 1896. And he was ridiculed. People said, this is insane. It is so expensive and it's never going to work. It's a foolish project. And then the project started running over budget, and so they began to attack him and for this, that it was never going to work and he was wasting the money. Finally, the day came, they finished the pipeline and they turned the water on in Perth. He calculated how many days it was going to take for the water to go 350 miles, and he said, on this day, the water will come. The pressure was incredible. The day came and no water arrived. And so because of that, what you see on that photo there, that is C.Y. O'Connor's suicide note. He killed himself because he could not face the pressure of the mockery. The problem was 2 weeks later, the water came. And it worked exactly like he said. The next photo, this is a centenary plaque. 100 years later, they're thanking him, remembering him for having the genius of building this pipeline. If only C.Y. O'Connor could have seen down the road 2 weeks. If only he could have seen 100 years later that plaque. But he couldn't. All he could see was right in front of his face, and that did him in. The text that we're going to read, Joseph gives his brothers the perspective of life down the road. He is looking at the exact thing that they're looking at, but he says, I see down the road. That is a perspective that every person, if you want to survive and you want to succeed, you have to have the ability to see down the road. I want to preach about seeing down the road. Genesis 45, we'll read verse 4 through 11. The New King James Version. Joseph said to his brothers, please come near to me. So they came near. Then he said, I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years, the famine has been in the land. There are still 5 years in which there'll be neither plowing nor harvesting. God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So now it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he's made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of all his house, a ruler through all the land of Egypt. Hurry and go up to my father and say to him, thus says your son Joseph, God has made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down to me and do not tarry. You shall dwell in the land of Goshen. You'll be near to me, you and your children, your children's children, your flocks and your herds, all that you have. There I will provide for you, lest you and your household and all that you have come to poverty, for there's still 5 years of famine. Seeing down the road. I want to begin. Let's talk about life perspectives. Every person here or watching this message, you have a perspective. Perspective is a way of looking at something. It's a point of view. Perspective involves what we see in life. The most common kinds of perspectives are positives versus negatives. Some people, their perspective, they only see bad things. Doesn't matter what's going on in life. They will find what's wrong. They're always unhappy, always upset, always suspicious. Perspective determines what you see. But more important, perspective determines how we interpret life. The conclusions that we come to based on what we see. Psalm 73, 2 and 3, as for me, my feet had almost slipped. I nearly lost my foothold, for I envied the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. This was Job's wife, looking at all of the trials and the troubles that they were experiencing in their lives. Her conclusion was, curse God and die. God is not fair. God is not worth serving because of what we're going through. That's a perspective. In Genesis chapter 45, in the verses that we just read, you see two very powerful perspectives that are very common: the immediate versus the perspective of down the road. The immediate is seen in verse 5. Do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves. When they see Joseph, they don't recognize him. They sold him into slavery, and he reveals himself, and they said, this is not good. We are dead today. They're looking at things in the immediate. That is how many people look at life. But Joseph has a different perspective. He is down the road. He says in verse 7, God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth. See, the immediate perspective is always incomplete, and it is dangerous. Some people, their view of life is dominated by what is immediately in front of them and what's happening right now, and this affects them. Happiness versus unhappiness. You know, unhappy people are always taking an immediate viewpoint. They are obsessed with what's happening now. Right now, people are mean and circumstances are bad. I predict that there are pastors and pastors' wives that you've been struggling in conference to hear the messages. You've been struggling in prayer because right now you're miserable because there are people not doing right in your church. There are people being mean. There are circumstances in your life, and this is affecting your happiness. Joseph's brothers, this is what happened to them, is they looked at the favor of the coat of many colors given by their father. They said, right now, Dad is unfair. They looked at Joseph, who proudly announced, guess what, guys? You're all going to bow down to me. They said, Joseph, he bugs us now. They came to a conclusion. We can sell him into slavery now. Reuben, one of the brothers, at a crucial moment, gave in to sexual temptation. He said it will feel good now. They had an immediate perspective. Joseph could have taken that perspective. He could have said his brother's view of me, how they're treating me and looking at me, it's unfair. They could have said, my brothers, they violated me now. I've been lied about and imprisoned in Egypt now. I've been forgotten by Pharaoh's officials now. The immediate, it determines success and failure. If you look at successful people on any level versus unsuccessful people, I guarantee they do not look at life the same. They see things very differently because we make decisions based on our perspective. Unsuccessful people, they have an immediate perspective. They spend more than they can afford. They get in debt. Their investment strategy is buy high, sell low. They give in to temptation. They become embittered when people don't treat them right. Pastored for 7.5 years in South Africa. I used to have people that they would go missing from church and had no way to contact them. And we would run into them in the place where the shopping was. We'd be witnessing, and I'd run into them and like, what happened to you? They often would put their hands to their head and they would say, oh, Pastor, I'm being pressurized. So, but why are you going to church? I have to get my head together. They were looking at it right now. You know, so many of those people that they were looking at what's happening in the immediate, you never saw them again. Because their decisions were affected by what they saw. The immediate perspective literally has to do with survival versus destruction. How you look at things will determine if you last over time. There are people missing from conference tonight who started on the kingdom journey with us because they took an immediate or temporary perspective. But somewhere along the line, they got embittered. They fell into rebellion, gave into rebellion, fell into sin. They did something foolish and failed to recover. They quit in despair. They stopped doing right. Galatians 6:9. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. When I was in high school, it was the very first time that I ever heard of anyone committing suicide. Had a girl that went to our school. She was probably 15 years old, maybe 16, brought a pistol to school and in the girls' bathroom shot herself in the head and killed herself. Now think about that. I'm sure that she had bad things. I didn't know her personally. She probably had bad things happening in life, but she was 15. Live life. There's a lot of time for whatever is wrong right now. It can change. But she committed suicide. All she could see was right now. But you know, there are people, they commit destiny suicide. In the very same way, all I can see is right now, they commit relational suicide, salvation suicide. Joseph speaks to his brothers from a very different perspective. His perspective is not immediate, it's down the road. Verse 7, God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth. They're thinking about the exact same circumstances, but Joseph is looking down the road. Did I go through hell? Yes. Did it hurt my head while I went through it? Yes. But I see it differently down the road. Soren Kierkegaard, he said, life must be lived forward, but it can only be understood backward. You know, there are things that my wife and I have gone through in life. At the time, they were tormenting. Some of the problems we faced, they were tormenting. There were things we didn't know how we could even go on. But with the perspective of being down the road, I could tell you about some of those exact situations, and it no longer, it's just information now. We feel completely different about it. There are things like, I get it now, down the road. The key to life is we have to live today with the perspective of what is down the road. In other words, today I'm not down the road yet. I don't know how this is going to work out, but I can react correctly and choose correctly because God said so. One of the names in the Old Testament that God revealed himself to Abraham was El Olam, God of the ages, literally the eternal God. God is so beyond us, he already is down the road. We're not there yet. God is down the road. He can see things that haven't happened yet as history. He already knows what's going to happen. And because El Olam, the God of the ages, says it's going to work out, we can say, God, I'm going to take your word for it. I am going to trust in what you say. The story of Joseph is like many of the stories in the Bible. God records other people's down the road stories. It's not just because it's history. It's because God is letting you in on the key to life. If you could look now with a perspective of down the road, you could choose by faith to believe God in his word. You could deliberately apply God's perspective to your current situation. You know, there's something that in the market trading, they call it insider trading. That means someone finds out the policy decision that the government is going to make, or they find out what a business is going to do. And based on that insider information that not everybody knows about, they can buy and sell stock with confidence because they already know what's going to happen. They know this decision is either going to make the market go up or it's going to go down. But this is what Joseph is saying. He says, listen, down the road, I'm telling you, God has this. And that we have to have this perspective. Let's talk about seeing down the road. 3 powerful perspectives that Joseph gives us here that we need to have. Here are the down the road perspective. Perspective number 1, he tells them God is in control. Joseph says that God plans things to happen in our lives. Verse 9, God has made me Lord of all of Egypt. That word made, it's the word intention. It means designed, assigned, appointed. He said God planned. He says, guys, you thought you were doing this? God planned, because God is in control. Do you know that God has plans for your life? Jeremiah 29:11, I know the thoughts that I think toward you, says the Lord. Thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope. That word thoughts is literally the word plans, intentions formed beforehand. God has plans for your life. But the story of Joseph shows us the problem with plans. Even if God tells you some of those plans in advance, he gives them the dream, everyone's going to bow down to you. But the problem with plans is that people and circumstances will make you doubt whether those plans will ever come to pass. He had those dreams of influence, but then he was hated by his brothers, spoken against, betrayed, lied about, imprisoned, forgotten. Isaiah 49:14, but Zion said, the Lord has forsaken me, and my Lord has forgotten me. The more your perspective is immediate, the more you are going to struggle when life doesn't go well. The text that we're reading is 22 years after his brothers that he's talking to sold him into slavery. 13 years of slavery and imprisonment, 7 years of plenty, now 2 years of famine. He's 22 years down the road. 22 years later, he sees life differently. Verse 8, so now it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me a father to Pharaoh, Lord of all his house, a ruler throughout all of the land of Egypt. He says, guys, do you understand? God was in control. Even when wicked people were doing their best to destroy, God was in control. Even when the circumstances were against me, God was in control. Genesis 50 verse 20, New Century Version says, you meant to hurt me, but God turned your evil into good to save the lives of many people, which is being done. See, down the road, if you survive, down the road, you can look back. And as I said, some of the most painful events of life, they're simply information now. Joseph is saying, he's talking about, this is not just data, this is painful. But he looks back and he says, I understand it now. It was for my good. It was for God's will. It was for other people. These things, I hated them at the time. I didn't enjoy them. But he says, God worked on me. God worked on people. God prepared circumstances, all for his good because he's in control. I look back on the circumstances of my life and I marvel at how smart God is. With the benefit of being down the road, I can look back on some painful people, negative circumstances. And now I can say, I thank God for them. Now, I'm not saying I want to be back there. I'm not saying I want to invite some of those people over Christmas, but I'm going to tell you, I thank God for some of those people because God was in control. Timothy Keller, famous preacher, he just passed away not long ago, pastored in New York. He was a Presbyterian, and he used to make this statement. He said, people in my church, they're Christians because I am a Presbyterian. Why am I a Presbyterian? He went to a seminary, and he had a professor who influenced him greatly who was a Presbyterian, so he became a Presbyterian. Why was his professor there? He was from England, and he was offered the job, but he could not get a visa, And someone who had influence in the government helped to get him a visa. His name was Michael Ford, the son of Gerald Ford, the president of the United States at that time. Why was Gerald Ford president? Because Richard Nixon resigned. Why did he resign? Because some burglars left a door open and a security guard found it. So he used to say to people, "You are saved because of Watergate." Think about that. You're saved because of a crime. That's the perspective of down the road. Joseph says, I want you to know God is in control. Perspective number 2, I have been sent. Verse 5, for God sent me before you to preserve life. Purpose is one of the most powerful factors of life. Acts 26:16, but rise and stand on your feet. I've appeared to you for this purpose, to make you a minister and witness, both of the things you've seen and the things that I will yet reveal to you. For this purpose. The word purpose means to put into the hand, or literally you become useful to God and to God's will. Joseph said, I was sent. I am here in Egypt because God sent me. Do you know you are where you are right now because God planned it? He said, no, it's just because I went to school. No, God sent you. My family, they just happened. No, God sent. He places people in certain places to carry out his will. The reason why that is so important to know is not on good days. It's on bad days. It's in negative situations. When you're wanting to make a choice, many times that choice is get me out of here. Joseph could have said that. I don't want to be in Egypt. I'm not from Egypt. I don't like it here. My people aren't here. But he said, I was sent. The choices you make in life, they're not just about your personal preferences. They're not just about your feelings and your happiness. It's about God's will, because purpose determines decisions. That is why you commit yourself to a local church. Pastor Warner preached last night about the church. You commit yourself. You don't float, coming whenever you feel like. No, you make a commitment. I will be there when the doors are open. Why? Because I was sent to this church. You get involved. Don't just watch a church. Find a place to get involved to help carry out God's will. We guard our testimony and destiny. Joseph, Potiphar's wife, she's throwing her body at him. But he said, how can I sin against God? God has plans for my life. I cannot damage the plans of God by sleeping with you. 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, Egypt and Syria launched overwhelming attacks. And Israel was caught off guard, facing annihilation. Prime Minister Golda Meir phoned U.S. President Richard Nixon in the middle of the night to plead for help. This is what Richard Nixon said. He said, I could almost hear my mother's voice. She would tell me stories and read to me from the Old Testament. One day she said, Richard, someday you're going to be in a position where you can help save the Jewish people. When that day comes, you must do everything in your power. And so Richard Nixon immediately, he sent arms and he kept the Russians out of the war. Richard Nixon may be remembered as a man who, a failure in different ways, but not to the Jews. The Jews say he's a hero. Richard, you're there for a purpose. And Joseph says every person needs to know this. I have been sent. Third perspective, Joseph says, I am here for others. If life is just about you, you're in trouble. Because you'll make selfish decisions that will hurt other people. You will make selfish decisions that will let people down. And you probably will be constantly unhappy. You're going to live like, you're not giving me what I want. You're not treating me how I feel I should deserve to be treated. But Joseph looks at the ones who violated them, and he says, You know what I see clearly? I am here for other people. Verse 7, God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth, to save your lives by a great deliverance. He says, God sent me for you. That's what, everything I've gone through, it's for you. It's for other people. When you have this perspective that you are here for other people, that will determine your choices. What am I going to do in life? What's good for other people? It determines what happens with the resources that God gives us. Verse 11, there I will provide for you, lest you and your household, all you have, come to poverty, for there's still 5 years of famine. Incredible wealth was put into Joseph's hands. And he said, God gave me these resources so that I can help people. Do you have that perspective about your money? God doesn't have any problem with you buying stuff and enjoying money, as long as you know that's not why he gave it to you. He gave it to you. You are here for others. God gave you money for other people. That should determine what we do in the offerings this week in conference. The people who wind up being the happiest, most successful, people who survive, are the people who have those three perspectives of down the road. Let's talk finally about the blessings down the road. We can see in the story of Joseph, it will bless you if you have the down the road perspective. Think about the joy that this brings. There's the joy of restoration. Genesis 45 is the point in life when the things of Joseph's life were fixed. And sometimes God can do that. Sometimes life can be fixed because you are healed. You know, many times circumstances may not change at all, but God heals something in you. And when God heals something in you, if you're not right inside, it don't matter what's happening outside. There's nothing right. But when you are right inside, life can be fixed because you're healed. Life can be fixed because your situation changes. What an incredible story. Joseph is sitting in a prison cell, and someone comes and says, wash, put on new clothes, and shave. Every man who needs a wife here, pay attention to those three things. Okay? And in a moment, in one day, he went from the prison to the palace. His life, God can do that. He can life can turn a page. Going through hell can stop. Life can be fixed because your enemies are sorted out. That's what happened in the book of Esther. Haman is building a gallows. Build it higher, boys. But God sorts it out. A couple days later, he's the one on the gallows. Life can be fixed because your relationships can be restored. Genesis 45, verse 14 and 15, that he fell on his brother Benjamin's neck and wept. Benjamin wept on his neck. Moreover, he kissed all his brothers and wept over them. And after that, his brothers talked with him. Listen, you know what's so common to people these days is the moment you have a problem in your relationship, cut them off. How dare you? You're out of my life. The story of Joseph, don't be so quick to cut relationships off simply because they're trouble right now. It may be that on down the road, everything can be different. Secondly, there's the joy of usefulness. Please don't let your life be wasted only on you. People with immediate circumstances, life is all about themselves. Joseph experienced the joy of knowing his life counted for something. He could make impact on other people. Verse 5, God sent me before you to preserve life. People's lives could be different because of you. If you're faithful to a local church, I don't care if you ever have this microphone, never are on this stage, it doesn't matter. You can play a part and other people's lives can be transformed. If you preach the gospel, you heard our brother's report Many of them were sent out in the last few years. Lives are being changed because they're useful. And we can become part of something that is eternal. God's plans are eternal. Verse 7, God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in the earth. You know what? You should connect your life to something that will outlive you. You buy something, it's going to break, or it's going to get old. The things, I got to have it, I got to have it. A few years later, like, what was I thinking? Right? The things of God are never like that. You can be a part of something that long after you're no longer on this earth, it still goes on. Joseph became a part of something eternal. The greatest joy of usefulness is seeing people saved and lives changed. Final thought is the joy of pleasing God. The story of Joseph is recorded because Joseph pleased God. Hebrews 11, he is listed in the roll call of faith. Here are heroes of the faith. Be like them. God is saying, be like Joseph. 2 Timothy 4, 7 and 8. I fought the good fight. I finished the race. I kept the faith. Finally, there's laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day. And not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing. One day, he says, you're going to stand before the righteous judge. And he is the one you want to please. This is a picture of ancient athletic games. There would be heroes, athletic heroes or military heroes, that when these people would win their athletic event, it was the heroes that would personally place the laurel crown upon their head or give them the reward. When they saw that, they would say it was worth it. Cold mornings, long hours of training, it was worth it. You want God to be pleased. You know, preaching is a funny thing, and sometimes the comments that you get from people. Sometimes, you know, people will say, good sermon. That's nice. Better than that stunk. That was horrible, I guess. But let's be honest, not all comments are the same. And not all people that I receive comments from are the same, right? In other words, there are people, I know their two favorite preachers are Benny Hinn and Joyce Meyer. And they say, Pastor, good sermon. Like, oh boy, thanks. 2005, I began to ponder. I was in a conference, and I'm looking in a Prescott conference, and I was thinking about the sermons that spoke to me. I began asking disciples which sermons, and it was always the same, 5, 6, 7. There's 17 sermons, but it was always the same ones, and I began to ask why. I began to give myself, I want to understand preaching. I want to be a better preacher. Began just working on it, understanding it first, and then working my butt off to try to get better at preaching. One night I preached in a Prescott conference. After the service, normally my parents leave immediately. My mom came up to me. Usually they're long gone by the time I'd even leave the stage. They're already home eating soup, I guess, but ready for bed. My mom came up to me and she said, your father wants to see you. I was like, okay. So is there a crisis in the fellowship he wants to talk about, or did I just do something terrible in the sermon? And when I walked up, I said, Mom said you wanted to see me? And my dad looked at me and he said, you did a very good job tonight. I'm proud of you. Now, I want to tell you, coming from the Prince of Preachers, that was one that meant a lot to me. But Joseph is talking about pleasing God. Paul wrote to Timothy and he says, one day we're going to stand before Almighty God. It's not our Father on earth, it's our Heavenly Father. Isn't that what you want? To hear him say, well done. You did a good job. I'm proud of you. Thank God for your faithfulness through the years. Thank God you didn't live selfishly, living only by what was in front of your face. That's why God records this. If we could have the perspective of down the road, we could make impact while we're alive, be rewarded, and have the pleasure of God. when we are in eternity. Let's bow our heads, close our eyes all across this place.